Good day to you all. My name is Chipo Divantimangrio and I am a law student at Great Zimbabwe University, currently pursuing an LLB degree at Herbert Chitebo Law School. Today I would like to talk about civil disobedience as part of my presentation, which was assigned to me by Mr. Nkosana Maposa at the Faculty of Law. So to begin with, I would like to start with defining what civil disobedience is. According to the New Oxford Companion to Law, civil disobedience is broadly used to cover a principled refusal to obey the law. It is a non-violent movement that calls for a change of policy or law. And in accordance to Brian Garner, 1999, he described it as deliberate breaking of the law to gain attention to a particular law or policy that has questionable legitimacy or morality. So basically, civil disobedience is generally described as a public movement or protest that calls for a change to a law or a policy that is unfair or immoral. And according to John Rawls, he further denotes that it is a non-violent act done with the aim to bring about change to the law and policy of the government. So, civil disobedience occurs when there is an unjust law or an immoral law that affects the majority of the citizens economically and socially. So I will move on to the history and background of civil disobedience. So civil disobedience is a concept that was inspired by various leaders from USA, Susan Anthony, to Africa, Nelson Mandela, and it is a mechanism that was used by activists to achieve a change of law and policy. The likes of Mahatma Gandhi used civil disobedience to attain the independence of India from British colonialism. And poets and theorists joined the movement, such as Percy Shelley, who wrote a poem entitled The Mask of Anarchy, following the Peterloo Massacre, which depicted unjust forms of political authority, to Henry David, who rose to fame through his essay entitled Civil Disobedience, which was originally entitled Resistance to Civil Government. In his essay, he explains why he refuses to pay tax, and this was due to slavery and unjustified wars. Since then, people have used civil disobedience as a way of revolting against unfair laws. So now we'll look at the characteristics of civil disobedience. So firstly, it has to be a non-violent act. Theorists argue that it must be a peaceful movement or a protest, and when violence is involved, it is no longer civil disobedience. And secondly, it must be public. This means that the public must be involved in voicing out the injustice or the immorality of the law or policy. Thirdly, there must be the willingness to accept punishment. So there is the likelihood that in participating in civil disobedience, there might be legal consequences such as arrest. So the participants must be willing to undergo this legal punishment to show that they are not in contrary with the legal system, but in the particular law that they would like to be disregarded. And fourthly, the core mandate of civil disobedience is to change the law. The fifth point would be it must be driven by a political movement. This is to say that there must be a political motive that drives the public to seek a fairness and equality in the social conditions in line with the constitution of their country. So I'll move on to theories of civil disobedience. According to Ronald Dawkins, there are three types of civil disobedience, which are firstly, integrity-based disobedience that occurs when a citizen disobeys a law they feel is immoral. It also encompasses that which determines the very meaning of the lives of citizens now and in future. Example would be religion-based resistance, when people believe that preserving their religious beliefs is the most important aspect of their life. Secondly, there is the justice-based civil disobedience, which entails that a citizen has chosen to disobey a law in order to lay a claim on some right denied to them. For example, when black people illegally protested during civil rights movement. The third one is policy-based civil disobedience, which happens when people break a law to change a policy they believe is dangerously wrong. It is not based on the belief that the powerless are being exploited, nor are the powerful requiring one to violate their deepest held beliefs. However, it is believed that those in power are failing to make right judgments and decisions which prejudices all. It is, however, not based on protecting basic human rights, but it allows the majority to impose its will on the minority in respect of matters to do with policy. Hence, the democratic theory is explored in policy-based civil disobedience. So, modern popular writings on civil disobedience can be traced to theorists and activists such as Henry David Thoreau, who wrote his essay on civil disobedience, which was originally entitled Resistance to Civil Government, in which he advocated for the abolition of slavery and unjustified wars, and the writings of Mahatma Gandhi, who used non-violent means to resist the law of the British regime, which he called satyagraha, in attaining the independence of India, and writings and actions of Martin Luther King Jr., who expressly relied on a version of non-violent resistance practiced by Gandhi in the protests he led as part of the American civil rights movement. Like Rosa Parks was an African American rights activist who fought against racial segregation policies, and on the 1st of December 1955, Rosa Parks refused to give up her seat in a city bus to a white passenger in Montgomery. She was arrested but bailed out the same day by the president of National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, which advocated for social justice for African Americans. Rosa Parks' action inspired the Montgomery bus boycott campaign, where African Americans refused to ride buses from Montgomery. This led to the case of Broder versus Guile, where the court decided that bus segregation was unconstitutional. And of course, the decision was appealed, but the Supreme Court of the United States affirmed the decision. We also move on to activists like Nelson Mandela, who was a South African lawyer who joined the African National Congress as an anti-apartheid activist of the 20th century. He became a threat to the ruling party through his leadership and involvement in protests and civil disobedience campaigns. In 1961, he realized that the non-violent protests did not yield the desired aim. He then led a sabotage campaign against the government, which included bombing military installations and power plants. In 1964, Mandela was arrested and sentenced to life imprisonment, of which he spent 27 years in prison and 17 years on Robben Island, and was released in 1990. Therein, he started peaceful campaigns for the end of apartheid. He successfully led the negotiations with the government to abolish apartheid and was elected the president of South Africa. We also move on to Mahatma Gandhi. So Mahatma Gandhi was one of the greatest boxers of his time, an influential anti-war and racial justice activist. In 1966, he refused to be drafted in the military so that he could fight the Vietnam War, saying that the war was against his Islamic religious beliefs and personal ethics, and was arrested in 1968 for draft evasion. Muhammad was sentenced to 5 years imprisonment and had his boxing license suspended and lost his boxing titles. He appealed the ruling, and the Supreme Court overturned his conviction to 4 years. His refusal to be inducted into the military and his outspokenness against war and racism made him an icon for civil rights movement. So these are basically some of the modern theoretical writings on civil disobedience that can be traced back to where civil disobedience started. So I'll briefly touch on the prominent question on whether lawyers are allowed to take part in civil disobedience acts. To begin with, the word lawyers enforces a relationship between the law and the person. So generally, the lawyer has two duties. That is, firstly, to uphold the rule of law, and secondly, to ensure that justice prevails. So a lawyer's primary duty is to uphold the rule of law. In such a case, his participation in civil disobedience acts is limited. Lawyers voluntarily enter into the agency relationship with law, thus they have a special responsibility to protect the rule of law and should not defy positive law. However, given the duty to ensure that justice prevails, the lawyer may be compelled to participate in civil disobedience acts as an individual on the basis of morality. Before advising, a lawyer must ensure that normal appeals to the political majority have been made in good faith and have failed before engaging in civil disobedience. Just because the lawyer has a special duty to uphold the rule of law, it does not mean that he must blindly adhere to unjust laws. Where injustice occurs, the lawyer has a special duty to use his or her expertise to correct the injustice. A German philosopher, J. Habermas, argues that civil disobedience is a key component of a mature democracy. According to Edward Snowden, it is not enough to believe in something. You have to be ready to stand for something if you want change. Therefore, civil disobedience is a necessary act in our society to change laws and policies that are unjust and immoral to the society and that hinder the social and economic growth of countries.